I love talking to our property manager and being like, hey, this person is really below market. Like, we need to bump them. They have that conversation.
Sure.
We don't have to have that tough conversation.
You need to be on the tenants right away so that they know that rent is the first thing that needs to be paid. A lot of it's about managing the expectations and trying to be reasonable with people.
You're just a full-time psychologist. You're just managing expectations. Welcome back to Sky's the Limit podcast. We're your hosts, Mike and Ryan, and today we have an awesome episode for you. We're talking all things property manager. We have a property manager as a guest named Sam Eddinger. He was a former nuclear engineer, very smart guy, and now he is a full-time property manager, manages 300 units. He's also an investor, has about 21 properties, just bought an office building here in Connecticut, and is a complete rock star. Happy to have him. But yeah, without further ado, let's bring in our today's guest, Sam. Sam, welcome.
Sam, thank you so much for being in the studio today. Why don't we get started and just get into like how you got into this whole crazy property management world?
Yeah, so I have an interesting story to me. I grew up in a family, 4 brothers, no sisters, and my dad was a shop teacher. And he never really knew a lot about stock market and things like that. So he used to invest in things that he knew. And so he bought property. So I grew up around property. And long story short, my dad, on a teacher's salary, ended up having a multi-million-dollar real estate portfolio today. He's only sold 3 properties in his life. One was a Hartford property, which we could talk about that one if you want to. One was a property to me specifically, and another one was a friend of the family. So the concept of buy until you die or hold forever really is exactly what I try to preach to everyone. If you hold real estate for long periods of time, even if you buy bad, you'll do well. So continuing the story on, saw my dad do this, was very passionate about it, was always looking to get into it. Went to San Diego, married my wife in 2004, went to San Diego for 4 years. And when I left, they gave me a book on landlording because even at that point, it was in my blood. I wanted to buy property. Came back to Connecticut, started looking to buy. Then I started buying in 2011, 2012. I wasn't a full-time engineer at that point in time. My background's in nuclear engineering. And ultimately, I quit my job in 2018, felt like I had hit my glass ceiling. My brother actually owns a property management company in Connecticut as well. So we both compete and cooperate. We call it coopetition. And ultimately, so he's kind of niched out to be more single-family home focused. I do more investor-based property management. And so started that in 2018 and haven't looked back since. So that's my quick story on it. The real reason I got into it was I loved real estate. I feel like there's only a few places where you can, there's a lot of places you can make money in real estate, but if you want to actually make it into a big time career, there's only a few places that you can do it, and property management's one of them. So, and also my brother was a person that was my mentor starting the business, and so I had someone that I could rely on to ask questions and really get started. So that's basically how I got into real estate and property management specifically.
How many units do you own in your portfolio, and how many units do you manage for other people?
Yeah, so at this point in time, my wife and I own about 21 properties. It's 53 or so units. We also just purchased a big office building. It's about 40 units, taken after you guys, going the office route. Some of the few ones that are doing that, everyone says we're idiots for doing it because office is supposedly dying, but doing that very successfully right now. We've been filling quite rapidly recently. So, if you want to count those units, we have 90-something, but I usually kind of separate them.
Is it shared office space?
It's executive office space. And so each person has their own room that they can lock and things like that. So, but yeah, they share bathrooms and share an office person, things like that. So.
And you found success. I mean, I'm happy to hear it because
it's like you're the only other person we've met that's also doing this.
Yeah, so it's a property. What I love about it, it's about a mile from my house. So like
Which is where?
Middlefield.
Okay.
So, and we found success. What's crazy about it is if you can do it well, there's a lot of money to be made. And so I think we're break even at about 70% occupied. And if we can get to something like 90%, which I think we can, by just building into the community, things like that, I think we're something like 40% cash on cash. So it's really these huge returns if we can just get there. So we're working on it. We spent a lot of money renovating the property, getting it to the point where people come in and like, I want to move here, right?
Yeah.
So
It's not a sexy asset class. No one wants to own it. You're buying them for 50 cents on a dollar, and your cash on cash is phenomenal if you are a good executor of that business model, which
and being a property manager and and working there, it gives me the focus to really get it done in a timely fashion.
So we have a lot of listeners that are kind of maybe in the analysis by paralysis stage that want to be investors. They're still working their jobs. Maybe they don't ever want to quit, which is fine. And one of the biggest questions I get helping a lot of my clients, beginning investors, is should I hire out for property management or should I self-manage? And, I have my thoughts, and we actually had another episode earlier that Ryan and I talk about property management, and we go back and forth. We have property managers currently, and we also self-manage. So for someone that's just starting out, they are buying their first investment property, and let's say they're not going to live in it. Because I think if you're going to house hack and you're going to live in one of the units, it makes sense to manage it. You're sharing the walls with your tenants. But if you're not going to be living in that property and you're, a busy W-2 worker, what are your thoughts about self-managing your first investment? Or do you, at what point do you think it makes sense to hire out?
Yeah, so that's a great question. My perspective on it is that you should absolutely self-manage. I think that when you do property management well, it looks very easy. And so that's always the concern is if I make this look so easy, it's like, well, why am I paying these guys? So we like to have people realize, interact with the tenants, deal with the vendors who don't show up, deal with all of that, deal with the accounting, understand it a lot better so that when someone then does take over for you, then it's done well and you can kind of manage that more effectively. I think the big question as to when you should do it depends on the specific person. Some people just can't deal with the stress of going on a vacation and having the thought of a tenant having an issue, right? That's a real concern to some. Some people, they don't like the stress of a tenant not paying rent and them having to constantly hound them for money. Some people don't like the vendors who never show up on time or whatever. So there's any number of reasons. The biggest reason that I would say that anyone should do is when your time is more valuable to you than the time it would be to actually manage the property. So a lot of, myself included, I had a really good W-2 job, and I had my brother manage my properties for me because it was worth the time, it was worth the money to have him manage the properties well. Whereas I was really focusing on expanding my portfolio of properties as well as working the W-2, 40 hours a week. So it really is up to every person about your stress tolerance, how well you can deal with that and navigate that, and whether or not you value your time sufficiently to do it. If you have lots of time, if you have a desire to kind of scale, I think it definitely makes sense to frequently do it yourself for some period.
Yeah, that's a great point. And in a previous episode, I talk about being out to dinner with my wife and getting those insane tenant texts that sort of ruin the whole vibe of the evening. And it was that point, I think I had like 10 or 11 units myself at that point. It was like, you know what? It's not worth it for me at this point. I'd rather take this off my plate and sort of relieve me of this stress.
And when you conceptualize it, so whatever that dinner probably cost you, maybe $150. You just go out to dinner one time less a month, and that is the property management fee, and you'll never have to deal with a tenant call. Like,
Right.
That is wild. I mean, So actually it brings me to my next question is probably the number one question is what do your company, what do your fee structures look like, and what's included in that fee structure?
Sure. So we basically have 3 different tiers because we know that not every person's looking for the exact same thing. So we have a basic, an advanced, and a premium tier. We do have some people that want to do all of their own maintenance. Maybe they have good vendors. Maybe we have some owners that maybe might own a plumbing company, things like that. And so they really can do their own maintenance. They just don't want to deal with the day-to-day headaches. And so in those cases, we have a reduced tier. It's about 8%. In that case, we're not doing any maintenance. We would literally be having that person coordinate all of the maintenance activities. In that way, the owner can actually become a vendor. So they don't have to even say that they're the owner. They don't have to have any of those conversations. We actually would prefer for them not to. And so we say, we're sending out a vendor to the property. Our advanced tier is about 10%. That's pretty standard. And then our premium tier is 12%. And that one would have additional things like, eviction coverage, free property reviews, things like that. It's all on our website, but basically it's for someone that wants a little bit more peace of mind, wants a little bit more everything handled, and doesn't want more hands off, doesn't want it to be more a la carte, because a lot of these features you can purchase a la carte as well.
That's interesting. I've never thought about property management in a tier system like that. It's either 6 to 10% is kind of the going rate, maybe 6% for more of an A-class property, maybe like an office building like that where you have more professional tenants, more 9 to 5, less tenant calls, less management, so I can charge less. 10% being all-inclusive, collecting the rents, all the bookkeeping, the tenant calls, all the vendors, dealing with all that. So having the tier system, that's interesting. It's
well, people like options. People really like options.
Options are good.
Well, it's the same thing with respect to if you're trying to purchase a property. Sometimes you want to give 3 options instead of 1, because if it's a one option, then it's a yes or no question. Where if it's 3 options, it could be which one. Right.
Yeah, we do that frequently, actually. Offer options. What for you is like the biggest pain point for a property manager? I think I always wondered that. Like, what is like, this is such a pain in the ass? Like, what is that moment for you? Is it like dealing with clients that like are just non-responsive? Is it dealing with just pain in the butt tenants? Like, what is the pain point for a property manager?
I think it's all of the above. It really kind of shifts from place to place. Sometimes we're dealing with vendors that are not as good, and so we need to improve our vendor networks. Sometimes it's owners that we can't respond or get an answer. Sometimes, especially in this market, it's owners that are struggling to be even able to cover the bills that are owed to them. We have some owners that owe us some money from some work that just got completed. And so, trying to get there's a lot of pain in the market right now. And then there's always the resident side. So, residents that, complain about everything, don't pay the rent timely, promise you something, and then don't do it. It's all of the coordination that could go wrong, right? Best laid plans of mice and men. Nothing ever goes as you want it to and as you anticipate. It's just the nature of the beast. Ultimately, is to hope for the best but expect the worst. And 9 times out of 10, it's going to be closer to the worst than it is to the best.
Yeah, that couldn't be more true.
You mentioned 8 to 12%. And I want to clarify for all the listeners out there, it's of gross rents. Yeah. And then is it of gross rents collected, or regardless of what rental income you collect, you're still charging 8 to 12%?
Yeah, so all property management companies do it a little bit differently. We've decided to align our interests with the owner. So we do it based on collected rent.
Right.
Our perspective is if we can't collect rent, then we shouldn't be paid, because why should an owner have to cover the mortgage and cover our cost when, for whatever reason, frequently out of our control, we're not able to collect rent.
Right.
Many other property management companies have a different philosophy, which is when a property is vacant and or they're going through an eviction, it's even more work than if a tenant just paying promptly. And so some of their philosophy is to actually charge a management fee regardless of whether or not a tenant lives there.
That's a tough one. I could see both sides. I'm more in agreement with you, and you want to align your interests with the landlords all in the same playing field, but going through an eviction is time consuming, and if you're covering that and you're not charging any rent, then that's just you're working for free.
So as far as your model, your structure, what do you guys do for stuff like a unit turn? Do you have like a percentage that you take of like the total cost for like managing the job? Other things like lease renewals, do you charge like 1 month's rent? Like those like extra things?
Sure.
Like what do you guys do for that?
Yeah, so we like to try to level load our management fee to what most other property management companies do in the area. And so most property management companies don't do things like property reviews, don't do things like lease renewals. It's surprising how many times we get a property and the owner has not upped the rent in 10 years or 15 years. We still have rents that are $800 when nothing should be $800 right now. And so we do a lease renewal, and we like to think of, for us in our property management company, we like to be different than what other property management companies do. I like to call it holistic property management. So what it is I'm getting the information to allow owners to make the best decision. So we do things like property reviews yearly, and we actually have technology that we've partnered with that allows the resident themselves to do their own property reviews as well. So we do 3 a year. We do 1 in person ourselves, and we have them do 2. And so what we know about tenants in those situations is if they know that an owner's going to be looking at how well the property looks, they're going to clean up. Right? Because they know that the owner's going to make decisions about renewing leases and raising rents. And so we want to get all that information to them. At the very least, we have it so the owners can see how well they're taking care of the property. So things like that, we're trying to do it, which we consider to be holistic, right? And then one other thing about that, which is also great, is if I have a person that's not willing to do it, well, then I'm going to be more apt to go do a surprise inspection, right? Mm-hmm. Because why is it that you're not willing to, like everyone else, a part of our portfolio, do these self-inspections? Right.
I want to highlight something you said because you just triggered in my mind something that I love about property managers, and it is super important. So when you're self-managing, like I don't care who you are, like you're going to get some sort of like, whether it's good or bad, like you're going to have a connection with your tenant, and that it could be a personal connection. You could be friendly with them, friends with them. Like there's all sorts of things that could happen. One of the most important things as a property owner is the income that it makes, right? Like, especially for commercial, based on a cap rate, that's what your property is worth. So when you're self-managing and you're not increasing rent, in theory, your property isn't really increasing over time. Of course it is, there's appreciation and stuff, but you want to be increasing those rents. But if you're friends with them, that's a tough convo. Right? Like you don't want to be like, hey man, like, look, I haven't increased your rent in like 2 years. I need to bump it $300-400, or like I need to, whatever it might be. I love being like talking to our property manager and being like, hey, this person is really below market. Like we need to bump them. They have that conversation.
Sure.
We don't have to have that tough conversation. That's amazing. I love that.
Yeah. I would procrastinate all the time. I just wouldn't get done. And so that's one of the best things. And Bigger Pockets, great real estate platform for them. And one of the biggest or number one asked questions regarding property management is, if I'm self-managing, should I act as the owner and landlord, or should I act as the property manager? What are your thoughts on that?
One of the biggest roles that we call it being a shit shield, right? So what we do is we protect the owner from all the shit that basically happens in property management. And to be honest with you, I like to blame the owners for things. Hey, I'm sorry, like with respect to a rent increase, even though frequently we're the ones making the recommendations, we can say, the owner really is pushing us hard. We actually tried to reduce it some because you're such a great tenant, right? So we can do things like that where we can play it off the owner, vice versa.
Someone's a bad guy.
Someone has to be the bad guy always, right? And so we can kind of use that to kind of make a tough situation a little bit more tolerable. With that said, besides being a shit shield, one of the things that really is great about these situations is that we can raise the rents appropriately because we have that level of separation. One of the things that we talk a lot about, especially with people that have been self-managing and these tenants like to play that card, is you get to decide who you give charity to, not the other way around. And so tenants like to do what I like to call forced charity. Oh, well, that's too much money. I can't afford it. Talk to the owner. He'll understand. Right? And now you're basically putting the owner in a hard place because you're trying to force charity. I never have a problem with an owner deciding they want to have charity, but I like to give them all the information about what it would rent for on the market, and then they get to make that decision ultimately. So we never want a tenant to force an owner to give them charity.
Yeah, that's it. Okay, this is awesome. So when I was self-managing, I struggled with this, and I probably did a really bad job at what I'm about to say. So what is your outlook as a professional property manager on this? Someone's late on rent. Maybe they're frequently late on rent. It's in Connecticut, correct me if I'm wrong, it's late after the 10th. Let's just say, it's the 11th, maybe it's the 12th. Are you frequently working with them like, okay, I need this by the 18th? Or look, you're late. If the 11th hits and you have not paid, we're going to evict you. Like, do you work with them, or do you step in right with an eviction?
I think it's got to be an art and a science. I mean,
that's what I always did, and I think maybe that.
What do you think?
Yeah, so I think that So we have some employees that have done this, and they kept playing that game where, the 18th, they said they're going to pay. And it always becomes difficult because at what point do you start the eviction? What point do you wait till you get to the next month, right? And so what we have found ultimately is that if a tenant gets 2 months behind, they're basically not going to be able to catch up, and it's going to be an eviction. So I'm of the mentality that I hammer tenants for collections. I start evictions quickly. Usually I'm starting it on between the 15th and the 18th. And we do note in the file if they're going to pay, and have tried to work with them. But with everything going on in the state, and we can talk about that as well, some of the new laws about late fees, I really think that you need to be on the tenants right away so that they know that rent is the first thing that needs to be paid. If they're prioritizing, car payments, if they're prioritizing their credit card, whatever else, they're more likely to end up needing to be evicted, and that affects the owner significantly. So the whole goal of the game on collections is for them to know rent is what gets paid first. And if you have that mentality, you're going to have success. If you want to give charity, you can definitely choose to do that. But when you also are like me and you have 300 units that we manage, you ultimately will get to a point where how do you say, okay, this person gets the 18th, this person is the 12th. Then you could also get into situations of discrimination. Like, why did that person get special treatment and I didn't?
That's really good. I didn't even think of that.
So, and then you could say, well, okay, that might be now a fair housing suit you could get against you. Oh, they're just doing it because I'm XYZ and they're not, right? So we try to be firm but fair. We always will give people one get out of jail free card where we will waive a late fee and explain them the policy one more time. But then after that, we basically have a policy of absolutely not, we're not going to waive the late fee again. And it's very difficult, but our philosophy is, I would feel really terrible if a kid's parents, bought them Christmas presents and I was serving them eviction notices. Right? Like, I think that they would rather have a house than have toys, right? But at the same point in time, I get it. It's tough out there, and especially with inflation. It's tough for people to meet all their bills right now.
Yeah.
Wow.
What platform do you use to manage all those rentals?
So our major accounting platform's at Folio, but we have a lot of supporting platforms that we use for various other portions of property management.
Yeah. At Folio, we use Buildium, but same idea.
Yeah.
So a few months ago, maybe 6 months ago, Mike and I were like, you know what? We love apartments. Don't get us wrong. But these people are kind of a pain in the ass. So let's pivot a little bit. We sold a couple of our apartment buildings, bought a couple offices, bought a couple large retail buildings. Would you agree? This is kind of our thought, and this is our property manager's thought, that these buildings, we're sitting in an office building that we own, more like, B class, maybe A class. Is it easier for you to manage those sorts of tenants rather than like a C-class apartment building?
Absolutely. Yeah. So D-class is the hardest. That's where people are like, hey, just get me some Section 8 tenants. There's a lot of turnover. Every single time you're turning the property, you might have to do like new cabinets. People are kicking holes in walls. Like it's a lot worse. So what we like to do is we like to provide a very good C-class product. That's what we're trying to do. So on turns, we're sometimes doing kitchen remodels, bathroom remodels. I put granite countertops in the units because it lasts longer and because you can advertise granite countertops and people like that, and it doesn't really have that much additional cost over like for mica or laminate. Yeah. So but definitely if you get houses are way easier to manage than apartments. And apartments, if you go like in Southington, for instance, is way easier to manage than say New Britain or Bristol, right? The tenant quality is not as good. And ultimately, because of that, you have a lot more hand-holding. One of the things that's really interesting is the demographic shift. So, millennials and Gen Z, they don't even know how to do things like put a battery in your thermostat. Like how to troubleshoot a little bit that your heat's not working because you turned off the emergency switch. So there's things like that we're constantly having to coach people on. How do you reset a breaker, right? 20 years ago, you would have never have had to have done that, any of that type of hand-holding. Luckily, we have YouTube that we can just find a good video and just send it to them.
Good old DIY.
Yeah, but at the same point in time, there's a lot of that. And it definitely feels like, when you go to C or D class, those tenant base also frequently expect you to do a lot more. What do you mean you're not coming to unclog my toilet? The toilet's not working correctly. That's been like that the whole time. What do you mean the sink? I need to get Drano for a sink? Like, no, come snake it. Like, what do you mean I have to put out traps for mice or for cockroaches. What do you mean? Like they just want everything done for them, right? They want you to send out professionals on a moment's notice. And so a lot of it's about managing the expectations and trying to be reasonable with people because, like you said, it is a balancing act. You have a situation where if you provide really good service to the tenant, they're more likely to not stiff you on rent.
You would hope.
Then you would hope.
Yeah.
But at the same point in time, it happens as well, right? Because what we found is that I believe that every person has great intentions, but they have poor execution. I don't think anyone goes into the world saying, I'm specifically going to stiff my owner on rent. What happens is they say, I don't have enough money. Something has to give. And so you want to be that portion that's prioritized for payment, not one that isn't.
Let me tell you, some people, they'll get you. They'll get you.
It's really frustrating.
But yeah, as a property manager, you're full-time property manager and investor, you're just a full-time psychologist. You're just managing expectations. That's it.
Yeah. So we basically believe that property management's about psychology, communication, organization, and being very analytical and also being super good at administrative functions. Like that's like the perfect property management company or people in
absolutely.
it. But to highlight what you guys said is exactly correct. And I've seen that so many times. And we frequently pick up owners specifically for that reason. What I'll tell you and your audience is the single most important thing that you can do if you're self-managing is to screen, right? If something doesn't seem right, go with the next person.
When you're screening, what do you have a minimum credit score or, what do you charge for security deposits? 1.5, 2 times? Is there anything on a background that you like absolutely not? So credit, background, and security deposit.
Yeah.
What do you look for?
Yeah. So we do a full eviction, a full suite of searching. So we do full criminal eviction. We do, credit, background. We're doing all of those things. We call 100% of the landlords, but a lot of times the landlords don't call you back, or the landlords will lie. I've had landlords lie to my face saying, "Great tenant." And then I hadn't looked up the eviction records, and he was actively evicting the person. So, but what we would say is, and we don't look at a number. We look at what's the cause of the number. There's plenty of people out there that don't abuse their credit, that don't maybe have many credit cards or have one. I had a guy that literally had a 5-something credit score, and he had one negative on his credit. It was a $25 medical bill, and he had a 530 credit score. Yeah. I rented him a house. Right. So ultimately, you have those type of situations that can occur.
It's an art and a science.
Yeah. And then I've also had 600s that I wouldn't do because every single one of their credit lines was contested. And so if you've ever had a situation where you're contesting your credit score or an item on it, like I, as a person that's saying that debt is actually true, has to prove that it continues to be true. And so if a person from like a medical has $25, are they really going to go out of their way to, confirm the $25 ultimately? Probably not. And so those are some things that we look at. We're looking for no evictions, no car repossessions, no utilities to like Eversource or CNG. Our perspective is, how do you work a job if you don't have a car? Our perspective is, if you've been
in our area.
Correct.
Yeah.
Our perspective is, if you've been evicted, you're more likely to be evicted again. And our perspective is, how can you be maintaining a property well if you're not keeping the lights on and the gas on, right?
Yeah.
So it's simple things like that. We don't really care as much about medical. We don't really care as much about things like student loans. We do find that those people that have medical and student loans do pay their other bills. They just, for whatever reason, don't pay medical and student loans. So we definitely discount those type of things in our analysis.
Yeah, no, that's really, really good. That's gold. One of the things that we used to do, and I still do, even, having a property manager, is go to, when we put our rentals for rent, we would put them on Facebook Marketplace. And there's so much information you can find about someone on Facebook. I remember trying to rent to some people, and we didn't allow dogs and dogs in this particular apartment. And like, yeah, pre-screening questions. Yeah, we don't have a dog. I go to their Facebook page because everything's on Facebook. And all right, dog's right in their profile picture. I'm like, whose dog's this? Oh, that's my cousin's dog. I was just watching it that weekend. Yeah, sure it is.
No, it's not.
A million other pictures of the same dog. Like, come on. So in addition to all your screening and background, maybe Facebook is another good option to just a quick thing. Everyone has a Facebook. But Sam, honestly, this is a great show. I think a lot of the listeners can benefit a lot from what you leverage your experience. We talked a lot about, credit, background, debt to income ratio when you're looking to screen a tenant, what are you looking for in terms of income to what the rent is? And in your opinion, it's 3 times the rental. So if it's $1,000 a month for rent, you look for the gross income of $3,000 a month. Some great tenant stories there. I think there's a lot to take away from this episode. And where can people find more about you?
Yeah, so you can look us up. We have a website. It's ironcladpm.com. So P for property, M for management. So ironclad, IRONCLAD, P as in Peter, M as in Mary.com. That's our website. You can call me or email me specifically, Sam, S-A-M, at ironcladpm.com. And my phone number is 860-254-7343. Call me, leave me a message. I do screen my calls right now, but I will call back every single person that leaves me a message. So happy to provide value to the industry, ultimately.
And we'll definitely link all of that information in the show notes. Maybe not your phone number, but hey, maybe it's a good number.
It's okay. I mean, like I said, for now, I can still kind of do that. And if it's not appropriate, I send it to the right person. So.
Awesome. You have people. Who not how.
Who not how.
Awesome.
That's the name
and
of the
if
game.
you like what you heard today, be sure to check us out on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, Sky's the Limit podcast. And just remember, sky's the limit. Dive deep and invest in how you want to live. We'll see you next week.